Okay, well, then our guests this evening are Bev Jackson and Kate Harris, who are the co-founders and some of the trustees of the LGB Alliance. And we will leave them to introduce themselves and the organisation in considerably greater depth shortly. The LGB Liberal Forum is a group of Liberal Democrat Party members who are same-sex attracted. And of course, we believe that a person's sex is real and it matters. And we work very closely with Liberal Voice Women within the party, and of course, to some extent, promoting the party to people who are not party members. But mostly we're devoting our attention to trying to make sure that the party takes on at least some of the basic principles that we stand for. Shall I introduce or let Kate and Bev say their things, Zoe, or hand back to you for that?
Yeah, no, let Bev and Kate introduce themselves and then we'll crack on with some questions. Thanks.
Okay, well, Kate and Bev tend to have a bit of a double act, so we thought we'd let them handle the next section between them and introduce LGB Alliance and what it does and why it does and how it came to be doing it in a little bit more depth and detail.
Well, I'd like Kate to start off because of her activities before with Stonewall, and then I'll interrupt as soon as she gets boring.
That's a good start, isn't it? Well, this year we celebrate our 5th official anniversary, 19th of October. Oh, I've got the date wrong.
Yes, it was the 22nd.
22nd of October 2019 was our very, very first meeting. There may even be people on this call who were there. It was a little meeting in Conway Hall. Prior to that meeting, my background, as you probably saw in the blurb, was that I was a feminist all my life and a campaigning lesbian. Brighton Women's Centre, Brighton Women's Aid was my stomping ground. And later on in life, I was very heavily involved in Stonewall during what we might call the glory days, when Stonewall was campaigning for gay, lesbian and bisexual rights, for freedom of speech, for upholding the values of a liberal democracy and promoting equal rights without taking rights away from anyone else. I started to get increasingly worried about what was going on with Stonewall, and I can go into as much or as little detail as you like about that. But in any event, I knew something had to be done, and from 2015, 2016 on, I just did not know what we could possibly do, because Stonewall was, everybody loved Stonewall. It was in our, I say it was in my DNA. We were so proud of that organization, and I tried to engage other former supporters and trustees of Stonewall just to say, what can we do here? And eventually, much against our every instinct, we decided we had to set up an alternative organization, because our job was to become an organization in the same way as Stonewall was in its good era. But in doing so, we were highlighting the fact that Stonewall had completely gone off the rails. So we can talk about that later. But anyway.
Well, let's just look at that year 2015 when Ruth Hunt took over, and having promised that she would keep Stonewall an LGBT organization. She promised that to Kate, to very many different people actually. And then as soon as she was appointed, she reneged on that promise and added the T. Now, that sounds like a reasonable thing. Why wouldn't you add, why wouldn't you be more inclusive? And the problem was that this so-called inclusion actually meant that many of the original people that Stonewall had always stood up for were now being booted out and were actually vilified. And that's because adding the T, what it essentially meant was, instead of being about sexual orientation, it was now about gender identity. And instead of talking about same-sex sexual orientation, they talked about, and they still talk about, same gender. And same gender means nothing, of course, because a gender is a self-defined thing. And that sort of it's basically, it gets rid of the whole idea of homosexuality. It gets rid of the whole idea of sexual orientation. Instead of that, you've got some nebulous thing based on this concept of gender identity that some people believe in. And we thought that if we just pointed out that lesbians in particular were really suffering from this in many, many different ways, and we can go into that later, that we could get them to see sense and they would talk to us and we would be able to find some sort of compromise solution or some way. We wanted anyway to set up a dialogue, but we just got no response. They would not engage with us at all and still won't. They depicted us as hateful because we did not want to include gender identity. We didn't want to redefine homosexuality. Do you think that's fair, Kate?
Yes, yes. I think we both tried independently. Bev was writing to Ruth Hunt, and after Ruth Hunt went, Jan Gooding took the reins. Jan Gooding is just as culpable as Ruth Hunt for what's happened and how many lives have been destroyed. We tried for 3 years to engage, even going so far, or I tried for 3 years, along with former Stonewall trustees, to engage, even suggesting that former trustees have a discussion with existing trustees of Stonewall, which would be moderated. I thought that they can't refuse that, but they did. So eventually, I was introduced to Bev by, I can't remember who, neither of us can remember who, but we met in 2019. And by that time, we'd both developed this enormous energy that was needed to get something going. And we had no concept of what it was going to be, what it would be called, how it would be funded, what reaction it would receive. But we basically wanted to set up a very responsible, respectful organization that would simply begin to discuss these ideas that were going around about sex and gender. So it was in response to Stonewall's no debate. Bev and I both agreed there had to be a debate. We said at the beginning to each other, we don't want to get involved at all in any discussions about trans. That's not our issue. And we couldn't think of a name for the organization. We tried all sorts of clever names like, you know, Athena or Phoenix or this, that, and the other. And Bev emailed me just before our first meeting and sort of said, why don't we call it LGB Alliance for now or something? And I said, oh, okay, that'll do as a working title. And of course, it's that name that has driven all the TRA and various assorted idiot MPs, MEPs, people around the world, drives them to a state of frothing, incandescent rage because we're only talking about people who are same-sex attracted. How dare we? As Alicia Kearns lectured Neil Hanvey last year, we don't know what's good for us. How dare we ask for organizations that are just for gays, lesbians, and bisexuals? So I would say that Bev and I, you know, we worked together. How many months before the meeting?
Well, the thing is, we met in April, and then in July, you remember, I was supposed to be speaking at the LSE event commemorating the 49th anniversary of the founding of the UK Gay Liberation Front, because I had been a founding member of the UK Gay Liberation Front, and they wanted me. I was the only one that was available, and I was going to speak at that, and then I said I wouldn't be the only woman. And so they got another woman on, and I checked her out. And that turned out to be someone who had played a really quite appalling role in gay liberation in the 1970s. So I said, sorry, I really can't be on the stage. Well, if I'm going to be on the stage with someone who has advocated for abolishing the age of consent and who helped to promote the paedophile information exchange, then I'm going to have to make clear that I distance myself from her. And within an hour, that meeting was cancelled, and I already had a ticket. So I thought, well, in that case, why don't we have our own meeting? And that's how we started, and that was in July 2019. Somebody is asking about the practical consequences of gender identity ideology. Yes, well, that's quite a big subject. I'm sure we'll get onto it later, though.
Oh yes, don't worry, Bev. We'll absolutely keep an eye on those questions and
Yes.
keep them into you once we've exhausted what you guys want to say. Bev, but I don't think you've really introduced yourself. Do you want to say?
Yeah, so I was a founding member of a UK Gay Liberation in 1970. And I was only involved for the first 4 or 5 months, and then I moved to the Netherlands, where I still live. So at the beginning, it was very clear at the beginning of Gay Lib that we worked together with Women's Lib. We considered our aims to be parallel and similar to those of women's liberation. And that was really an important part of it. And as I was watching from afar, and more gains were made in gay rights, and I was just pleased at how things were going. And eventually, of course, same-sex marriage was passed, and I thought things were going wonderfully well. And then suddenly, in 2016, I started reading some very peculiar things about what was going on in gay rights, and I got really worried. And it seemed that people were thinking that that you needed to change your bodies, which is the last thing that LGBT people had ever wanted. And so I was very, very concerned. And gradually, it became clear to me that the people who are into body modification had taken over the gay rights movement, and that there wasn't a gay rights movement anymore. And this was a really shocking thing to discover, that who was standing up for people who are simply attracted to others of the same sex, who don't think there's anything wrong with themselves at all, but who are simply same-sex attracted. Nobody was doing it. In fact, if there was a dispute between a body denialist, if we can call them that, and a lesbian, then all the LGBTQIA+ and so on organizations came down on the side of the body denialist. And there was nobody standing up for lesbians and gay men and bisexuals. And I just thought that was really shocking. And I thought, I must have got it wrong. Surely it can't be like that. It can't be that bad. And so the more and more research I did, the more convinced I became, the more apparent it became that that is really what happened, that there'd been a takeover of the gay rights movement, which was now advocating for something completely different. And because it presented itself very cleverly as here's the latest civil rights struggle, and most people want to be on the right side of history, and so they think, okay, this is the latest civil rights struggle. Yeah, right on. We'll go along with that. And nothing could be further from the truth. It is a sexist ideology which is doing a great deal of harm. And I wish we didn't have to talk about that, because what I'm more interested in is setting up facilities for LGB people, like our friends organizations, which groups we're getting all around the country, the helpline, which we'll come back to later, and so on, facilities for LGB people. I don't really want to talk about pernicious ideologies, but we sometimes have to, because they are affecting LGB people.
Thank you, Bev. And I noticed that the founders, chair and CEO of LGB Alliance, you're all women. So was that by design, or is that just how things have worked out?
Well, yeah, we had no plan at all. I mean, we had that meeting in October 2019, and at that meeting we'd laid out some ground rules. We knew we were for freedom of speech. We knew
maybe we better just make it clear, when she says we, it was just the two of us. It was just Kate Harris and me, with no money, no backing, nothing. I mean, all these American nothing of that is true. It was just two women.
So we'd laid down the basic foundations of how we were, what we believed in, and why we existed. And one of the reasons we existed, clearly, which has remained our #1 priority, is that we know that if we were little girls now, we would have had puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, double mastectomies, the lot. I certainly would have fallen hook, line, and sinker. So the reason we wanted to stand up and do something was because we couldn't stand what was going on for kids like us, and also we couldn't stand the double impact it had on lesbians. But prior to pre-Bev, I had been working with some gay men, but the gay men, I'm so sorry to say this, gay men, but your fellow gay men were not quite as reliable as Beverly, because one of the things that it takes to set up an organization from zero, nothing, is hours and hours and hours of mind-grindingly boring work, detailed, boring admin work. And the gay men that I worked with previously were good at the ideas, but they weren't so good on the delivery and execution. So it was pure chance that it was Bev and I who got together and did the work and delivered that meeting. And then subsequent to that, we had Alison Bailey stand up, again, a lesbian, obviously, and launch us onto an unsuspecting world. And nobody was more surprised than Bev or I, because we were expecting to launch 6 months later. So the fact that we've then gone on to have a chief executive officer, Kate Barker, who's a lesbian, Eileen Gallagher, our chair of trustees, who's a lesbian. It's just we have found that the right women have come along at the right time, but we also have some very strong male trustees. We're just hiring a new employee because at the moment we have women. We're going probably, I believe, we may in time. There is one of the things we say to all our supporters, where we are not a radical feminist separatist group. We are at our heart is the fact that we are same-sex attracted, whether we're gay men or lesbians or bisexuals. That's what unites us. If you want to work with women only or with men only, there are other groups, but we are very much mixed. We've always made a big song and dance about the fact that lesbians are the ones. We are quite clearly, if people don't understand this whole discussion, it's the lesbians on the sharp end. If someone says, well, I don't really understand why a man can't be a woman and he can't, why can't he just say what he wants to be? And then you say, well, the next step is that a lesbian who doesn't want to sleep with a man who says he's a lesbian is a transphobe. And suddenly you see that we are at the pointy end. So I can't say that it's coincidental. I can't say it's planned. These things have happened, but we will always, and we have very strong men, always have from the beginning in the policy team and the trustees, and many, many, many of our supporters. It's interesting, if you come to our conference, and we hope you all do, on the 11th of October at QE2 Centre, it warms the cockles of my soul or my heart to see that it's roughly 50-50, and that's exactly what we wanted.
Just to give you some idea of the lesbians being at the sharp end of this, I was talking to a lesbian detransitioner, someone who has changed her mind, in her 20s, and she was telling me that when she was a teenager, that the only people who called themselves lesbians were men, heterosexual men, and therefore girls who felt themselves attracted to other girls didn't want to use that word. So lesbian had become a kind of dirty word. It has become a dirty word. And so these girls who've got no community, and there's no one taking care of them or setting up role models for them, they call themselves queer or they call themselves non-binary, and quite often they end up going down the road of puberty blockers and double mastectomies and so on. And I just thought it was so shocking that we know that there are heterosexual men who call themselves lesbians, but that was so firmly entrenched that those were the only people calling themselves lesbians. It's a theft of our word for ourselves, and it's diabolical. And lesbians are definitely the people who are suffering most from the ridiculous replacement of sex with the fantasy idea of gender identity.
Thank you, Bev. So you've touched on a few issues that specifically affect lesbians there, lesbian erasure and around dating as well. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the freedom of association aspects and how that impacts lesbian groups.
Well, there aren't any. This is what's This is what is why we're so somebody's asked in the chat, do we work with other groups like Sex Matters, KPSS, Fair Play for Women, etc. Yes, we very much do, and on a very regular basis. But we also work with the lesbian groups, because
And with Gay Men's Network as well.
yes, and with Gay Men's Network. So although the reason we are LGB is because we believed that we had a function as almost a replacement, Stonewall, as the go-to organization for government. So, the government doesn't want to go to a lesbian group and then 3 groups. They want to go to one organization for policy advice, etc., etc. So we see ourselves as subject matter experts for all things LGB. But we do work with other groups all the time to offer support. And in fact, while I've got the microphone, there is a march in Leeds on the 14th of September called Lesbian Strength. And very often it isn't well patronized. So it looks a bit weedy, or has done to me in the past. So this year the managing team are inviting any other groups to come along to support them. Same way as you may have seen a trans march in London a week or 2 ago with about 6 trans people and 60,000 queers. We're asking for anyone who wants to go to Leeds for a lovely weekend, go up on the 14th of September and just support the lesbians, because we do not have freedom of association anymore.
Oh, that's what it was about. Now I remember. Freedom of association. Honestly, Kate, you are terrible. Zoe asked about freedom of association, and that depends, of course, on the definition in the Equality Act. And that's why, so when we're talking about the importance of defining sex in the Equality Act, that also means we have to define the definition of sexual orientation in the Equality Act is also hinges on the definition of sex. These two things hang together. And while the genderists, or the TQ people, whatever you want to call them, are trying to get gender identity in there instead of sex, it's extremely important that we hold firm and say, no, this is about sex and about sexual orientation, because the right of association, if you have a protected characteristic, you have the right of association. But if it's blurred what your category is, then it's very difficult to defend the right of association. So these definitions are incredibly important in this whole thing.
Yes, and may I add to that?
Oh God, she's going to go off on another tangent.
I'm not. I'm just going to say that one of our favorite places of association, as lots of lesbians on this call will remember, used to be the good old lesbian clubs or the good old lesbian discos, and they might only be once or twice a week. But you'd turn up and there'd be a whole load of lesers, and you'd have a lovely time, and you'd all go home again. And now, where do we go? Where do I go? I don't go anywhere unless I'm prepared for there to be men there. To be honest, I'd rather go to a gay club, a gay men's club. Not that why am I talking about clubbing? I've been clubbing for about 38 years. But if I did, but one of our groups is in Australia, LGB Alliance Australia, and they've done a fantastic, deeply depressing, very clever map of lesbian shops, cafes, bars, clubs over the years. I think if you Google it, you'll find it, and they've all gone.
Yeah.
In the US, I remember trotting across the US with a guidebook in my hand, pre-internet, and going from lesbian guest house to lesbian guest house from a guidebook, and there were hundreds everywhere you went. And now, of course, you just won't know whether or not they're going to be probably inclusive, because the actual number of lesbian bars per se in the States is just sort of apparently in single figures, in 1 or 2 in New York left, 1 or 2 in God knows where. I shouldn't think there are any in San Francisco, because in San Francisco, Castro, all the lesbians started to believe that they were men, and the ones who didn't have surgery and hormones therapy people said to them, why are you scared? What are you scared of?
Yeah.
And so, go on. Sorry.
I was going to say, it sounds very much like it's being driven underground then. Is that fair to say? And
Well,
how
Sal Grover is fighting this important case in Australia for the app that she set up for women. And a man wanted to get into that app and she denied it. And that this has become known with this ridiculous name because her app is called Giggle and the person calls himself Roxy Tickle. So this is Tickle versus Giggle, which sounds like a joke, but it isn't a joke. It's actually really quite an important case being playing in Australia. And it's all about whether women can have any space for themselves, even online. And the theft of women's spaces is something that particularly affects lesbians, because lesbians, of course, may want to go looking for a lesbian partner. Well, if you're looking for a partner, it's kind of obvious that you know, that you want to be able to join a dating site where there's only women there. Yeah. And although it wouldn't bother somebody of our age if there were men there, you just ignore them. But you can imagine an 18-year-old girl going looking for her first girlfriend and discovering that she keeps getting hit on online by men and not knowing how to gracefully reject them. And it's a very nerve-wracking and unpleasant experience. And it's extremely difficult. You can get, Lucy Massoud got banned from a lesbian dating site for saying she was only interested in biological women, which is what a lesbian dating site is for. I mean, that's where we are these days.
Just on the other side of the coin is the legal situation. And, you know, for Women Scotland are trying to get a definition once and for all as to what is a woman. And we intervened in the case in Scotland, and we put forward a whole load of evidence about on this subject as it relates to lesbians. Because again, I stress, I see us as the sharp end of it, and we had lots of examples. And we'll be probably doing the same if we are allowed with other groups of lesbians to intervene at the Supreme Court in support of the For Women Scotland case. So we do an awful lot of legal work in the background, responding to consultations, trying to talk to the Council of Europe, trying to talk to the United Nations, constantly explaining what, and I really don't want to neglect the men, because the men and the young gay boys are really badly affected by this. But one of the biggest challenges we have still, especially in international global bodies, is to insist that a lesbian is not a transbian. You probably saw UN Women last year on Lesbian Day of Visibility saying, don't forget men can be lesbians. You know, in Turf Island, we're very lucky. There is a lively discussion, but in most of the international institutions where they're talking about violence against lesbians and violence and lesbians, they mean men.
Yeah. Well, I think I've just got one more question before I hand over to Toby, if that's okay. And that is, if there's any young lesbians watching now or watching this back, what message would you have for them, Kate and Bev?
Come to the conference.
Yeah.
Then, because you'll meet other people and you'll gradually be able to build up at the kind of network which is very difficult to build up locally. I should say that, for instance, so with our friends groups around the country are going quite well. But one of the other things we tried to set up was a student network for young LGB people who are feeling isolated at university. And universities are just about the worst place in the world to try and come out as LGB without getting in all genderized. And it is proving quite difficult. Because of the hostile environment in which students find themselves. So, but we are finding a new way of doing that through other groups, and it's something that we really want to do because it's important to reach out to young lesbians and gay men. I mean, it's just shocking when that a lesbian we met the other day said that throughout her school career at secondary school, she was told she must be a boy because she's got short hair and she is attracted to girls. I mean, can you imagine? And she's a very strong girl and she just didn't take any notice of it. But can you imagine how incredibly damaging that is? And they get the same message online as well. And the same thing is happening with young gay boys who are being encouraged to think that maybe they're girls and that they'll somehow be happier like that. And it's just the most abominable attack. It's a homophobic attack. And people, when you explain that this is a homophobic attack coming from the organizations that were once gay rights organizations, they can't wrap their mind around it. And in fact, they tune out and think, oh, that sounds too weird. Can't believe that, because it is incredible.
Yeah.
One of the areas that we had in our business plan, year 1, was setting up a LGB helpline. It was set up this year, which is year 5, thanks to various people disrupting our activities for a few years with legal challenges, and Charity Commission, all the additional work that we had to do that was unnecessary because of people attacking us. But the point about the LGB helpline is that every single person, there may be people on this call who are volunteers there, and thank you very much if you are, but the one qualification, apart from being CBD checked and all the safeguarding and training, etc., but the one qualification is you have to be lesbian, gay, or bisexual, so that it isn't a helpline for LGB people, because half the kids don't know what they are anymore. But the point is that they can ring a helpline where they know that the individual that they will be communicating with is lesbian, gay, or bisexual. And I think we want to get that message out more and more broadly. We've just started it. It's just a pilot to begin with. It's going well.
Yeah, we've hardly publicised it yet, because we're just getting through the first few weeks, and now we're starting to publicise it. And so it serves teenagers from the age of 13 to 17, and also young adults from the ages of 18 to 24. It's just so important. Those are the ages at which many, many, many young people are becoming confused, because everything they hear about is about gender identity, and the notion that a so-called feminine boy has therefore a feminine gender identity, or that a butch lesbian has a masculine gender identity. It's just such a ridiculously old-fashioned, regressive sexist idea. And those are the young people that we hope that they will come to us, and they can just discuss we're not an advisory service, and I'm not involved in it at all. Because I would not be the right person, because I like to give advice. But these are people who are very, very good listeners and have experience. Most of them have experience working with other helplines, and they know that they're trained. And of course, as Kate said, they're very, very severe safeguarding checks, because it's so important with this age group that every single effort is made to keep it safe.
Thank you both. I'll hand over to Toby now. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Zoe. You were talking a moment ago about people saying they would have seriously questioned their sex in their childhood, or people saying that now, I guess. I've experienced a lot of that in people of my own generation, and people maybe 10, 20 years younger than that, and pretty much all of them are women. But that's an older generation. So I wonder if, as far as you can see, that has changed because of the way that the ideology has been being pushed among youth.
I think it has changed, because we certainly, the ones that we know, several cases of young men who are being sort of sucked into this ideology and are starting to take estrogen and to become quite estranged, I think, from their bodies and their sexuality, and online influences. I think that the pornography sites, which are probably much more active now than they were maybe 20 years ago, are playing some role in that. But definitely, and we do hear from men who say, yes, I would have done that too. It's true that it's more women who say that, but we do hear from men who say the same thing.
Somebody in the chat, I think it's Anne, has said that she you know, wanted to be a male, it was looked like much more fun and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, you know, of course, every time you speak to any group of women, they will, lots of us have grown up with brothers, or we've been at mixed schools, or, you know, we've seen that boys get away with murder. The girls think, I want to be a boy. But whether you actually grow up to be a lesbian or grow up to be, you know, straight and happily married and so on and so forth, I mean, I just think it's a feature of a society that treats boys and girls so differently, that girls are going to naturally want, or a lot of them are. But one of the most astonishing cases I came across was a woman, very highly educated, surgeon, Swiss, and in her mid-30s decided to have a full sex reassignment surgery. I don't suppose she had one of those awful fake penises, but all the rest of it, to make her look and sound like a man, to advance her career.
Really? To advance her career?
But Toby, that's the only case I've ever come across of that. But it just shows that for some people, they really will do anything. But as I say, that's the only case I've come across.
We've had a message coming in from Tish, who says she's a parent of a gay male who identifies as trans and is medicalised, unfortunately. But she's also taken 3 calls from parents of boys, other boys, in just the last fortnight. So clearly there is quite a bit of it about, and it may be that a huge amount is very much under the radar. And I guess
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it is still the case. I think Tish would agree that at the moment the in terms of percentages, those who are being referred to so-called gender clinics, a funny thought when you come to what on earth is a gender clinic, but anyway, those being referred to gender clinics, 70% of them are still girls. So, but I'm sure that there are many young men who are being sucked into this at the same time. I just want to say something about America, because although we live in, or well, I don't actually, but this is a UK call, and we work in the UK. The internet is very international, and UK kids do look at American sites, and they are subject to American propaganda and American influences, and some of them are extremely fierce. And I would advise any parent to really pay attention to what your children are looking at, because they can very easily, especially if they're going through a period of not getting on with their parents very well, and somebody says, why don't you come to me? I can give you a new family. They don't understand you. I understand you. I mean, you know, it's very creepy. It's very unpleasant. And unfortunately, children who are going through difficulties can easily be seduced. I think is not too strong a word.
I think one of the issues that we are really sort of focused on at the moment is, what is Bridget Phillipson going to do? Because it's the schools that are providing the pipeline to the gender clinics, and it is absolutely criminal. Tish is saying Childline is a huge push. I agree, and there are loads. We know every single charity now goes along with this nonsense, except us. But it is our education system that is teaching this to children, and unless she, you know, a lot of people in Labour say Bridget Phillipson, she's got a brain, she knows perfectly well that there are 2 sexes, but unless she prohibits, outlaws the teaching of gender identity ideology in any form in our schools, the number of boys and girls going to these clinics is just going to carry on increasing, because children believe what they're taught at school. They actually, you know, we are taught to respect what our teachers are saying, and to believe that what they're telling us is the truth. And it's not until you're really quite a bit older, when you've left school and you look back and you think, well, hang on a minute. But for a lot of people like Richie Herron or Sinead or, you know, Kira, any of them, it's too late. And the responsibility on you in the Lib Dems and, you know, the Labour Women's Declaration and Conservatives for Women and us as a non-party political organisation is just going to be massive when she announces what she's planning to do. Because don't forget, she's Minister for Equalities as well. I mean, I'm slightly, well, I wouldn't say I'm slightly, I'm extremely concerned that it's too late, too little, too late.
I would encourage everybody to advocate for joined up thinking within the different departments of government. So we know, we're obviously very pleased that West Streeting has signed up fully to implementing the CAS review, the recommendations of the CAS review. That's so important because it's important to us as LGB Alliance, because most of the teenagers who get caught up in this are kids who are attracted to others of the same sex. We know that, and it's always been known that this is a particular group, and so it's very good that that West Streeting has signed up to implementing the recommendations of the CAS review. But at the same time, Labour is planning to introduce a ban on what they call conversion practices. And I hope that everybody realizes that a ban on conversion practices is absolutely not what it sounds like, because conversion practices are horrible. Nobody wants conversion practices. You don't go and try and convert people, whether to a religion or try and convert them to being straight. But what is happening, if as we fear, what will get caught up is people who question, if a girl says I'm a boy, question whether it's parents or therapists or teachers or whatever, but hang on, why are you saying that? That can be, and unfortunately it is in Victoria, Australia, called a kind of conversion practice. So it has a chilling effect on discourse, and it's completely at odds with the recommendations of the CAS review, because CAS says what these kids need is a holistic approach. So the government has to work together. So you can't implement the CAS review here and then introduce a ban on exactly what the kids need over here, and then not pay attention to what Kate was talking about, all the propaganda at school. These things all hang together, and we think these government departments need to work together.
Could I just ask a question? I saw somewhere today that Layla Moran is a possible chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee.
God help us.
Is that something that you can deny or confirm?
Until that's determined, it's not determined, and it is not determined by us. I can tell you that.
I
It would
know.
be determined by the parliamentarians.
Yes.
And I guess led by the party leadership in Parliament, rather than a vote of all of the Lib Dem parliamentarians or even MPs. To be honest, I'm not terribly hopeful.
You are very brave. I just wanted to say that. I haven't said that yet. I think you are all fighting in the Liberal Democrat Party for common sense and for facts and evidence, against a leadership which has gone so far in the opposite direction. I really admire your staying power and determination to try and turn the party around. And I really hope that you're able to do so, because it's really quite tragic what's happened to the Liberal. It's not quite as tragic as what's happened to the Greens, but it's pretty tragic, it seems, from the outside. I hope you don't mind me saying so.
That's okay. I think it would be fair to say that we are presented with huge challenges in the Liberal Democrats, but I don't find it painful or traumatic, and I think most of us don't, because between us and Liberal Voice for Women, we are an extremely strong, coherent and mutually supportive set of bodies, and we work incredibly well together. Mostly it's the women of Liberal Voice for Women, and they've taught me a great deal about how organisations can operate.
All brave here, because we're all fighting what is really quite a pernicious ideology that has somehow managed to insinuate itself into the public and private sectors, and we're trying to get it out, aren't we?
You were talking earlier on about the helpline and what you're trying to get going there in the very early stages. How about the local groups? How's that working out? And I speak as a member of the East Sussex local group. There are some others in this meeting at the moment, which has got off to an absolutely terrific start in the last, 6 weeks?
They've been incredibly popular, and there's more and more growing all the time, and all around the country. And you get a sense of how relieved people are to be able to break through this isolation that they were in, and not to go, to find that the only LGB thing going on is some weird thing with drag queens and or some other event at which they feel alienated. So yes, I think they've been going. It's rebuilding a sense of community, which is something that the LGB world has lost since it was taken over by the gender identity crowd.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that. It was extraordinary when we had that first meeting in 2019, and that it was almost euphoric. This sense of there's 70 people in the same room. And it proved that we weren't all mad, because one of the things that I think happens to all of us, and I really feel for Anne and all of you who've suffered, is that you start to doubt your sanity, and you think, hang on, here's a perfectly sensible person who I agree with on all sorts of issues, and they're saying that I'm a neo-Nazi bigot all of a sudden. And if enough of this keeps coming at you day after day, and people, as you said, you lose friends, people don't want to speak to you, you're not allowed to speak in meetings, you've been thrown out of organizations that you started, all those kinds of examples that we've seen, and you end up in many cases going to court or formal suspension. I'm afraid I have to use the phrase, it does your head in.
It is so strange. All the people that you've spent your life. I mean, I've been, a progressive activist all my life. I've, from gay lib to anti-apartheid against the Vietnam War and against Iraq, and I mean, I've just marched in every bloody cause you could think of. And then suddenly to find that all those people with whom I used to march are now calling me a bigot. It's I mean, what I was doing just before I got involved with LGB Alliance was I did some voluntary work with refugees on Greece, and I wrote a little book about it. And I mean, it's just very, very peculiar to be thrown out by, what you thought were your own people.
Which is why these friends groups are so essential, because it proves that we aren't insane and that we are doing the right thing. But also we have to remember how vulnerable we are. We had a chat last week with our solicitor about our international groups. We've got 20, I call them self-seeded.
We shouldn't call them our international groups. International groups which have drawn inspiration from us and which like to follow, to do the same sort of thing. Anyway, they're not ours.
Beverly, we've got our groups, our 20 groups around the world have self-seeded, and we want to set up some kind of organization that says you're welcome, we love you, as long as you agree with the same things that we stand for, i.e., freedom of expression, respectful debate, social media policy, don't do ad hominems, and this is what we are here for. So we talked to our solicitor about this for a while, and he just reminded us how delicate our existence is, and that at any moment, as you were describing the suspension process of one of your members, Toby, at any moment, a well-known lawyer who dislikes us very much, or any other troublemaker, can make a complaint about our behavior.
Well, complaints are being made all the time, of course, and they have been since the beginning.
But were any of them serious enough to be taken up, our organization could fail. And you know, we're celebrating 5 years. We're celebrating the fact that in court we were allowed to continue as a charity. But there are many, many people who do not think that in 2024 we should be allowed to have a charity for LGB people in the United Kingdom. And you know, your existence is also precarious, which is I'm coming in full circle here. This is why we need to meet up as friends groups, or come to the conference, or come to one of our regional meetings that we have around. We did Scotland and Wales and Northeast, Northwest last year, and I hope we'll do the same and start doing the same again, just to help people feel good. And what we said when we started was that we want to be able to enjoy ourselves along the way. We want to be able to have fun. It's about love, not hate. You know, all those cliches, but they're all true. We're here because we love other people like us, and we want young people like us to have the same opportunities and happiness that we've had.
And how important in all this, having mentioned the local groups, how important is the conference? How much difference has that made to the organisation or its members so far, do you think, and where's it going?
Okay.
I want to pop in a plug for the conference later on this year while you're about it.
Yes. We had our first conference cancelled, I think, because of COVID. So we started a year late. I chose, because I'm quite bossy. Some people in our organisation wanted us to be a Morris Minor, and I said, no, we'll be a Rolls Royce. So some people said, well, let's have a nice little meeting back at Conway Hall. So I said, no, let's have a nice little meeting in the heart of Westminster at the QE2 Centre. Because if you do that, you're saying, we're here, we exist, you cannot ignore us. And as with every other single thing that we've ever done, we were nearly stopped. So we put the booking in, we met the nice people, we got the deposit through lovely supporters like you giving us the money so we could put that down the deposit. Next thing we know, QE2 Centre is bringing us up and saying, no, sorry, you can't have it. The other customers have heard that you're coming and we can't afford to lose their business. So it's all terribly depressing, but we have found that the most incredible.
Wait a minute, I better, because she's not explaining, but actually then we discovered that the QE2 Centre, because it's government owned, cannot do that. And therefore
that's incorrect, Beverly. Thank you. If I may finish my story.
Well then explain how that happened. I thought that they couldn't.
See, she interrupts and she's wrong. I'm so sorry, everybody. Could you mute her, please, Toby? So, as I was saying, we've been very lucky with the people who come to help us. So I was blethering on about how shocking this was to Baroness Anne Jenkin, that well-known Tory Brexiter, who's become a very close friend. And what she did was stand up in a meeting of, I think, 300 Tory peers were being addressed by Michael Gove. Guess what? Michael Gove was responsible for the QE2 Centre. So she stood up and said, Michael, I think you'll find there's a freedom of speech issue here. Are you aware that the QE2 Centre is threatening to block LGB Alliance, who have every right to hold their conference in this state-owned institution? And of course, next day, conference can go ahead. So, you know, without these really, really important actions by individuals standing up for us from in the most unexpected places, we would never have been able to hold the first conference. Then at the first conference, we got that idiot disrupting it and filming it and saying somebody beat her up in the lavies or whatever it was. I can't remember her name, some lunatic TRA. And then they had another excuse to say, you can't come this year. So every year has been a battle. But now,
not anymore, I think. Not anymore.
First year, second year was a battle. Third year, fourth year, it's normal. And the reason it's so important, Toby, is it puts us on the map globally. You can't ignore an organisation that has a conference, that politicians pop over from the Houses of Parliament. It's bang in the centre of Westminster. We have got our flags flying, and people do come from around the world because this is the only thing of its kind. I mean, it's shocking to say, but it is the only conference of its kind.
And it is a wonderful day. And I remember that hearing from the guy who was responsible for the technical work on the projector, saying, because he sees all these conferences all the time, this was the only one he'd ever found interesting. He was absolutely fascinated by the whole thing. And we try to have different speakers, different subjects every year. And obviously, although we do not live stream it, we do video the different sessions and we put them on YouTube. And yes, they go around the world. And I think the conference is enormously important. We can bring people together to discuss issues that are not being discussed anywhere else.
It's also a forum for LGB Liberal Forum and Liberal Voice for Women to put up their stands and make themselves known to the LGB community generally. So that's terribly useful for us. Thank you very much indeed for that.
Well, glad to hear that.
You were talking a moment ago about talking to Baroness Anne Jenkinson. Do you have...
Jenkins.
I beg your pardon. That shows how ignorant I am about all things political. Do you have much communication with parliamentarians, or do you find that it's... I'll carry on.
Well, that's my thing, really. I'm obsessed with politics and politicians, and I try to stalk them whenever possible. I hang around in Portcullis House, and if I see a politician who needs to be put right on something, I will have a quick word. But the problem is that my gateway to Portcullis House, because being in the parliamentary estate is really important, because you do bump into all sorts of people, and Stonewall are in there all the time, hanging around, talking to people. But to do that, you need a contact, and my contact was Joanna Cherry, and of course she is no more. So
you mean she's lost her seat? That sounded a bit too dramatic.
She's of no use to me. Poor Joanna. But Neil Hanvey's gone. Who is that the lovely Tory? Lee Rowley's gone. A lot of our gay and lesbian supporting MPs have gone. So at the moment, I'm not aware of one gay or lesbian MP who supports us. Are you, Bev?
Well, I don't know, not supports us. I mean, obviously.
No, the answer is no. And we're still working through with you, with Labour and with Conservatives and Women, trying to work out who might be supportive. And I believe there are some Scottish MPs who are lesbians who may be supportive.
Well, Kemi, of course.
Kemi isn't a lesbian yet.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yes. Forgot about
You're working on it.
Yeah, I'm working on it. So the answer is at the moment that we do need to, I mean, within your group now, you've got 72. None could be relied upon to stand unequivocally in support publicly. It is the threat. It is. I don't think this fear is misplaced. I think the Lib Dems have played an appalling, I would say, so much discredit on the party that my family certainly supported for years. And as a 7-year-old, my first political demonstration was holding up a big poster at the end of Worthing Pier I was there with my mother, and I had a nice big poster saying, "Vote for Joe." And if anyone remembers, Joe Grimmond. So the fact that the Liberal Democrats have behaved so appallingly on this issue absolutely staggers me. Although I'm going to do another name drop. Vince Cable was my MP, and I see him fairly regularly. His wife, he says, is a massive TERF. He can't understand Ed Davies' attitude on this. But my current MP, Munira Mirza, refuses to speak to me. And she's education. So the reason that I was given as to why Lib Dem MPs are so bad, I mean, Bev and I had a nice meeting with Vera Hobhouse one day, But she just didn't get it. She thought it was all about, you know, swapping clothes and
It's really good that young people get a chance to experiment.
like
It's
Boy
the
George
young
and that.
people, I really learned so much from them that they can
Mm.
experiment with their identities.
But another
And-
MP who will remain unnamed told me that this is before you had 72 or 71, when you had, was it 12? She said, when we're all straight, we're all white, we're all heterosexual. If we need to talk about anything to do with LGBs, we ask Helen Belcher.
This is not a
And
good thing.
Amber Hartman has just named the particular MP who said that to me. I mean, I said to her, why would you go to a man who's got adult children? I think he's got, anyway, I said, basically, why don't you talk to us? Because yes, it is, yes. It's just astonishing that Lib Dems that we used to rely on, all of us, I think, as a party of sense and sensibility. And we, of course, wanted a stall at your conference straight away, immediately. Wouldn't never even, except for that one year when they said, yes, you could have a stand, and then told us we couldn't on Twitter. But I gather Mike Dixon is still discussing things with you about your stands, and maybe Mike Dixon will one day talk to us. But isn't the essence of being the Liberal Party a willingness to discuss?
Well, this is, I suppose, one of these words, liberal, is one of these words that's been turned inside out and upside down and no longer means what it used to mean. It's just really shocking that there's such a refusal to engage. It's just this, a bubble that you can't get through. People have heard this is the view that we're supposed to have. This is the right sort of view. Those people over there are bigots. We don't want to talk to those. Oh no, you mustn't talk to those. And there's just no willingness at all.
We've got a rebel, haven't we? We what did we decide his name was, Toby?
Sorry, which is this?
The rebel off from the Scottish Islands.
Oh, well, we don't yet know that yet.
Oh,
we
it's
do.
a secret.
No,
No, it's a secret. It's a secret, Kate. You're
It isn't.
letting the cat out of the bag.
I know there is a Scottish Liberal Democrat MP who
Yeah.
said that he does not share the party's views on such matters,
Yes.
and they have come to an accommodation on that.
Yes. That's
That
not
is-
secret.
That's, I suppose you could say that's a pretty hefty rebellion by Liberal Democrat parliamentarian standards. So in that respect, yes, you're right.
So are you planning a meeting with that MP very soon?
We need to talk to our new parliamentarians in general, and particular parliamentarians, of course, us and Liberal Voice Women. Like you, we have a lot of things on our plate.
Do you send regular newsletters to MPs? Have you sent one out to the new Liberal Democratic MPs?
We haven't done so at this stage, no, but I'm sure we will work on initiatives together with Liberal Voice of Women.
There are, of course, Lib Dem peers,
Yes.
aren't there?
Mm.
And I'm just thinking of Sarah Ludford's not the only one, is she? I mean, there are others.
Lib Dem peers are very different from Lib Dem MPs because they don't depend upon remaining on the right side of the party's disciplinarians in order to keep their jobs. Peers can lose the whip, but they can't be thrown out of Westminster. And indeed, the leadership of the party in the Lords is very conscious that even the leadership is not subject to the disciplinarians in the party. And I think there is a majority of Lib Dem peers which do not want the disciplinarians within the Lords group to be able to crack that whip against everybody else. They believe in the liberal value of discussion and difference of belief within groups, amicable dissent. That's much more of a challenge, of course, among the MPs. We shall see how that has changed because, of course, now they have a whole term ahead of them in which they can plough their own furrows and in which they're not going to be thrown out of Westminster.
Are there no channels for those Liberal Democrat peers to talk to the new influx, for instance, of MPs and to exchange views on what liberal values actually mean?
I think that is a matter for Liberal Democrat parliamentarians to talk about, and we do have entries into that group. We do talk to parliamentarians generally. So yes, that's not an entirely closed book. The party has put a lot of effort into locking us out of communication with the party membership as a whole over the last few years, of course. That's why you weren't able to exhibit at conference, and we and Liberal Voice for Women have not been able to exhibit at conference. And we are working on that, and we're going to see if the party does recognise that the Equality Act, not the Equalities Act, 2010, does not allow the party to discriminate against a group of party members, or indeed a group of non-party members, on the basis of their protected beliefs. So we will have to see where that goes, and we might find ourselves having a lot more interesting conversations with a lot more party members if we manage to crack that particular nut.
I think it's really important that we present, that we as LGB Alliance and any LGB group explain that we are positive. We're not anti. We are pro LGB people, pro young lesbians and gay men and bisexuals having role models that help them to become happy and healthy individuals. Pro good sex education, which doesn't confuse children and tell them all sorts of nonsense that they might have been born in the wrong body. And if we present that we are positive, we are positive in our approach to life and to sexual orientation and to freedom of expression, so that we can talk to people with whom we disagree.
I think, yes, we do put that across as the Liberal Voice for Women, and I hope that occasionally we make an impression with that message, as I'm sure you do too. You were talking earlier, very briefly only, about your charitable status. And I think it's quite important that you were the first, and for a very long time, the only gender critical charity in the UK. And I think charities are a UK concept anyway, so that means in the world. And you've now been joined by Sex Matters. I think there are still none others. What pushed you in that direction? What made you decide to do that? And has it really worked for you so far?
Yes, I could probably say that was my decision. Just because we sort of, because we were under attack within 5 hours of our first meeting ending, we became a limited company very quickly, because we had to handle incoming positives and negatives. Incoming positives were lots of people wanting to send us money, and you can't have money unless you're some sort of legal entity. And by the way, this wasn't the 5 million checks. This was the £30 postal order. But so we became a limited company almost immediately. And then it was my Stonewall background. I thought, well, Stonewall's a charity. We need to replace Stonewall as the go-to organization for LGB people. And of course, there's a massive tax advantage for reclaiming tax through gift aid on donations. The other thing is that it gives you a type of credibility that being just a limited company doesn't. And as I said, Bev and I always agreed that we wanted to do things straight down the line to the highest possible quality within our means. And so I think we always wanted to be the best, because there is something slightly lower, not lower down, but you can be some kind, not quite a charity, but something else. I can't remember what it's called. And people said, oh, you should do that because it's much easier and get
CIO, isn't it?
Who?
The CIO.
Something or other. But I said, no, let's do the whole hog. If, you know, if Stonewall can be a charity, we need to be a charity because we need to be peers in this battle. We need to be, thank you, CIC.
Oh, okay.
We need to be on an equal footing. And it means that we're eligible for different types of grants, not that we've got any, but there are organizations who will only, and there are actually private trusts who are only allowed to give to registered charities. So those were the reasons. They were financial, it was a matter of status and influence. I think it's paid off very, very strongly because look at the shock it caused. You know, people went, the opposition went absolutely crackers. How
Yeah,
can
the
you
number
have,
of petitions that were launched against us being granted charitable status, and then immediately when we got charitable status, there were petitions trying to remove charitable status, and then a certain KC Fox Botherer got so exercised that he wanted us to bring us down, and he managed to make a deal with Susie Green, and that didn't work out quite how mermaids had hoped, I think is fair to say. But they have tried from the beginning to remove that charitable status. And of course, we were a charity from the beginning, but it's being a registered charity, which confers all these advantages. And it also imposes a certain discipline, which I think is good.
yeah, we know they're under constant scrutiny by the commissioners.
Yeah.
Not the actual commissioners, but by staff at the Charity Commission, because they're constantly getting, they said, when we got registered, they had, no, when they announced that we had been made a charity, they had to take on additional staff to
deal with the
handle
complaints.
They were so inundated.
They'd never had so many, so much correspondence about anything as they had with our charitable status. And
I think that gives us so much food for thought about the extent of the threat that we posed. And that is why we had to set up, because prior to us, anybody who challenged gender identity ideology could be written off.
They were called homophobic. If you
homophobic.
said anything about gender identity, if you challenged it, you were called homophobic. So when we came along and we're LGBT, we're lesbians and gay men and bisexuals, and we say no, we don't approve of changing sex into gender identity, and that enabled other people who agreed with us but who didn't want to be called homophobic to say, well, actually, I agree with that. So, you know, we say we tore up the playbook, is what you were saying the other day, isn't it, Kate?
Yeah.
Or tore up the script. That was what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think
sorry,
Maya Forstater's court victory enabled you to achieve that with the Charity Commission, who could, after all, have said no in the first place, or could have backed off very quickly and said, sorry, but we've changed our minds, no? And do you think that your success in turn has made it a lot easier for Sex Matters and perhaps further gender critical organisations after them to apply for and achieve charitable status?
Well, are you talking about the court case? Do you mean that did the Maya Forstater appeal influence the court case? Is that what you mean?
Yes, and I appreciate I might have got my timelines wrong here.
Yeah, because I mean, because Forstater's original judgment went against her, and then the appeal went with her. And it's true that I'm pretty sure that our court case was after that, wasn't it, Kate? Was after that, yes.
Well, your court case was, but your original application for charitable status.
Oh no, that was before that. Oh, we applied for charitable status almost immediately, and Kate was working at it night and day for months and months, and constantly getting new requests for information. It took over a year.
But you actually got that granted before the Forstater appeal was won, did you?
Yes, because that's
that
right.
is very interesting and surprising to me, frankly.
Well, I mean, we are not I mean, although it's true that that people often refer to us as a gender critical organization, we are an LGB organization, and this is something that we had to say again and again in court. I mean, we're not set up to pursue any kind of ideology, not at all. We're set up to help lesbians, gays, and bisexuals. And one of the ways we have to help them is to stop them being medicalized, you know, and in order to do that, we have to explain about gender identity and so on. But we are essentially an LGB organization. That's what we are.
Mm.
Moving back to an earlier topic, I'm being asked by one of our audience how one goes about setting up a local LGB group.
They should contact our organizational head and say that they wish to do that. And that's through the website. You can easily find that information, I think.
Is there a form or something on the website to set up a friends group?
I think so. But anyway, if you send to Kerry Mullin, so kerry.mullin@lgballiance.org.uk, or just go onto the website and find her, she can give you all the information you need about setting up a local friends group. And maybe you might find out that there already is one in your area, but because there are now quite a lot.
Yes, I'm just hunting for the web page. Here it is. I will stick it up on the chat. It is lgbgalliance.org.uk, Friends of LGB Alliance. Just getting that up now. Right.
If you get very bored over the winter, the entire transcripts of the mermaids trial are available on our website, and they do make mind-boggling reading. It's just, you know, it is quite extraordinary. The witnesses for mermaids, i.e. John Nicholson MP, shame he lost his seat.
Yeah, really tragic.
And the bloke from LGBT Consortium, and then poor woman from Mermaids. I mean, the evidence they gave was just, you could not make it up. It was so bad.
You see, originally the case was not against us. Basically, what Mermaids did was it challenged the Charity Commission's decision to register as a charity. So we had to decide whether we were going to just stand back and watch the Charity Commission explain why they had done it, or whether we needed to join the proceedings. And this was a long and difficult discussion because it's expensive. It's an incredible amount of work, and so this was a big internal decision. We have a very, very good board of trustees, but this was one of the first things that they had to decide because we hadn't been a charity for very long, and our board meets every month, which is takes an incredibly close interest in everything that happens. It's really very sound. But anyway, we had to decide whether we were going to join those proceedings, and we decided we had to because it's our existence as a charity. And if we just left it to the Charity Commission, they would not be able to think of all the arguments why we had needed to set up and all the goals that we had and the things that drove us. And so Kate and I spent months and months writing our statements, gathering evidence. It was one of the biggest jobs we've ever had to do. And they had not expected us to join. And so they put up 3 witnesses who really, I mean, it's very entertaining reading the transcript.
Somebody in the chat called Helena Bev has just said, make a coffee table book of it, Christmas present of the year.
Well, it's true. Actually, it struck an American filmmaker as so amusing that he actually made it into a play, which was put on in Camden in 2023. It is very funny. These people say the most extraordinary things. One of my favourite moments is when the CEO of the LGBT Consortium is asked, would you say that it's transphobic to say that a person born female cannot be a gay man? And he said, could you repeat that? Yes. Would you say that it's transphobic to say that a person born with a female body cannot be a gay man? Yes. That's transphobic. And this is, LGBT Consortium is this organization. It has over 500 affiliated organizations, many of them are trans organizations, so that's apparently all right, not terribly inclusive, but there you go. And but we were denied a membership of LGBT Consortium because we're not inclusive, because we do not think that people born with female bodies can be gay men. In fact, we think it's a load of rubbish. And that's not allowed, because that's inclusive. That's not inclusive, and it's transphobic and really quite bigoted and horrible.
Bev, who is going to play you in the film?
Me, Kate Blanchett, that would be nice. Who's going to
That's
play
me.
you? Hmm.
Yes, I'm afraid Kate has grabbed Kate Blanchett. You've missed that opportunity.
Uh-huh.
This is
Right.
typical of the kind of infighting within LGB Alliance. We hear
We have a lot of fun together. It's such a close group, and people are so dedicated. It's just a very, very loving organization, and very funny, and very open. We have disagreements, and we have which is allowed. It's very nice to have a group of people with whom you can disagree with without everybody going ballistic. And I've never known such smart, dedicated, funny people, and courageous, of course. As I was saying to Anne before, courage is the thing that I think everybody here has got in common.